wanted to be viewed as a CEO who's completely accessible, who was open to listening to all of the employees' feedback. So I would have roundtables with the employees, any level, who wanted to sit down and chat with me, 10 people at a time. So I was always out there with the front line because I wanted to hear the voice of the employees.
CEO Voices, Leading with Communication, examines the communication that enables transformational leadership. In this episode, we speak with Indra Nooyi, former CEO of PepsiCo, who shares thoughts on the power of communication in inspiring and engaging employees, investors, customers, and other critical stakeholders.
Indra, thank you for joining us today for our CEO Voices podcast. We are delighted to have you with us on the show and look forward to your insight. First, I'd like to ask you, like so many of our MBAs here at Darden, you interned out of college and began your career in consulting with Booz Allen Hamilton and Boston Consulting, respectively. What did your time in consulting teach you about the importance of communication?
My time at Booz Allen, my summer internship at Booz Allen, and then when I went to work full-time at BCG, I would say were both transformative experiences because consulting gives you such a wonderful start to your business career. It exposes you to great issues. You operate at the highest levels of a company, and you work with incredible teams. But I also realized and learned while I was consulting that you can do the greatest analytical work and come up with the best conclusions. But if you can't communicate it to the client in a compelling, convincing, interesting way, your conclusions fall thud on them. So I think one of the things they teach you in consulting and one of the things you have to get good at is communicating what you're doing, what you did, what the analysis says, what the conclusions are, and present it in pictures, not just numbers. Say, this is what the company could look like if you did something. This is what the future could look like. So everything had to come into a shape. And that's what we learned in consulting, and I think it stood me in good stead for a long time.
You also spent a lot of time in corporate strategy functions, another passion area for our students and alumni at the Darden School. How did those experiences shape your voice as a leader?
I think going from consulting to corporate strategy, which was a great landing spot in a corporation, allowed me to practice what I learned at BCG. In BCG, you learn frameworks, you learn how to approach a business, understand the value drivers. And then very often you leave the company after you identify all the levers you had to tweak. The great thing about going into corporation is that you now figured out the value drivers. You now know what you need to tweak and how much. But then in a corporation, you had to make it happen. And the more you figured this out and then worked on how to make it happen, the more credibility you built in the company. And those who did it well were viewed as having made the transition from consulting to a corporation successfully. Those that didn't do it well usually got kicked out of corporate America because you were viewed too much as a consultant. So I think I had the consultant in me kicked out very soon because as I moved into the corporate world, after 6 years in consulting, 6 wonderful years, I could not just apply the frameworks, but I could also translate it into how does it apply to the front line and then go off and make it happen.
Indra, I'd like to go back to 2006 for a moment. It was certainly a historic time by all measures. And I got to tell you personally, we felt it at the Coca-Cola Company as well, your appointment as CEO of PepsiCo. Can you talk a little bit about your immediate communication objectives and how did you go about prioritizing your audiences that you needed to reach initially as you were taking over the helm?
It was a time when I would say most of corporate America was run by men, and there were very few women CEOs. I think there were 11 women CEOs then, and no Fortune 50 company was run by a woman CEO. So when I came into the job, I was a real outlier, and I didn't come in through a traditional path of having the P&L responsibility for a business. I came into strategy, finance, operations as it applied to running it from the center. And so I had to get out there and talk credibly to investors and get them to believe in me. Even though they knew me very well as a CFO and a president, I had to get them to believe in me. At the same time, I will tell you that in looking back, I had to do a lot of communication because I was so different. People wanted to write about me, whether I participated in the story or not. So, in order to shape the story and convey the messages accurately, I had to participate in more interviews than I wanted to participate in. I actually wanted to lie low for 6 or 9 months, but I was forced to participate in the stories. So, besides communicating with the investors, I also had to speak to a lot of media because it was Indian media, it's women's media, it was media here that was spinning stories about me. So I had to talk about myself, talk about what I was going to do with the company. I had to assure them that just because I'm so different from my predecessors, I'm not going to do something crazy with this company. It's still a high performance company. My job is to take it to the next level. So I had to reassure them. I had to not calm them. I just had to allow myself to be known as a CEO in front of all of these constituencies.
Indra, the Pepsi-Coke rivalry, of course, is legendary, and volumes have been written about it. But at the end of the day, PepsiCo is really more than just a beverage company. So I'm interested from your perspective about the specific challenges of leading such a diverse house of food and beverage brands, all of which I would think would require a different communication nuance, if you will.
It's interesting, Steve. The Pepsi-Coke rivalry is legendary, of course. I agree with you, but it's such an old story. And for some reason, it keeps getting taught in business schools, and people still talk about the great competition between these two companies. Personally, if I had any say here, I would retire all the Pepsi-Coke cases. They're irrelevant. Because the market is no longer a battle between sodas, it's a battle between share of stomach, which is completely different. But let me now come to the diverse portfolio that we had versus our principal competitor and how we managed it. First of all, brand communications, individual business communications, all that happens in the division. That's why they exist. The division presidents are very good at talking about snack foods or beverages or breakfast items. And individual brand managers talk about their individual brands. At the corporate level, my job was to talk about PepsiCo and why the businesses coming together made sense. And not the individual brands, but why do snacks and beverages belong together? That's the real narrative I had to communicate to investors. They knew that it made sense, but I had to keep reassuring them they still belong together because there was always pressure from some outsiders to break up the company or become a pure play beverage company and a pure play snack company. So I had to sort of resist that movement and constantly explain the power of one.
No, it's terrific. And I guess, adjacent to that concept too is the mission that you help galvanize and enhance and further at PepsiCo, the whole performance with a purpose mantra. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that played an impact in galvanizing your culture?
So when I took over as CEO, PepsiCo is just a wonderfully performing company. It has a legacy of great leaders and also has a legacy of leaders who sort of looked around the bend and saw what was coming and made changes. So as I took over the company, I noticed that a lot of the growth in our beverage business was being taken by the upstarts who were all positioning themselves as healthy beverages. I also noticed that the sales of regular sugared sodas was going down and all of the growth was coming in non-carbonated beverages and lower calorie, zero calorie beverages. And I knew that we had to do something to accelerate our move towards what I call better for you and good for you products as opposed to just fun for you products. The second thing is at that time, there was a lot of pressure on what we call HFSS, high in fat, sugar, and salt products. Now, what is high, nobody defined, but they just went after categories because all countries were looking for additional revenue. So they thought taxation on certain food categories would get them a lot of revenue. They were never going to put it back to address public health issues, but they just wanted revenue. So that was one set of issues that were facing us. The second set of issues facing us was that in many countries, they viewed us as using too much water to make a liter of beverage, 2.5 liters of water to make a liter of beverage, when many cities in the world were water-starved. So we had to reduce our water usage in our manufacturing. And because we had one-way plastic, it was clogging up the landfills. and they wanted us to figure out a way to reduce our plastic usage. And finally, if you go back to 2006, the big move that was happening was that millennials were searching for purpose. They wanted to know why they should work in a company. They were questioning everything. And some of the millennials we talked and we held millennial town halls, a lot of them, basically what they were saying is that when they tell people they're working for PepsiCo, while people love the products, consume them in every part of the day, they also ask these millennials questions like, but you're working for a company that makes treat-like products, that makes sort of junk food, as they called it. And my point was, that's not the impression we want people to have of PepsiCo. You spend most of your waking days coming to work. You want to come to work saying, I'm working for a company that's leaving a positive impact on society.
When I was reading your book, My Life in Full, you talk so much about the performance with a purpose almost all throughout. And maybe the words performance with a purpose came when you were looking at transforming the industry and the company. But also you spoke so much throughout the book about your interest in your employees and talent management, and as you just said, in making sure that people come to work knowing that they're fulfilling themselves and their company and their communities. Can you talk a little bit about that passion that you had for human resources and talent management?
PepsiCo was full of extraordinary people. There's one thing that PepsiCo has been known for decades, is that we're a talent academy. And so I knew that my job was to keep that legacy of developing great talent going. And talent does well, especially when you have a diverse talent base, does well when you engage them professionally and give them intellectual stimulation. But you also have to connect with them on an emotional level. People are facing, especially coming out of the financial crisis, people were worried, people were concerned about where the world was headed. They all lived through the financial crisis. And you can't just ignore it and say, just show up at work and give us your best. So we had to really think about how to make every employee feel like PepsiCo truly cares for you. How do we break down the barriers between different levels of the company and the CEO's office? I wanted to be viewed as a CEO who's completely accessible, who was open to listening to all of the employees' feedback. And, they could talk to me anytime they wanted on whatever issue they wanted. So I would have roundtables with employees, any level, who wanted to sit down and chat with me, 10 people at a time. I was always on the road meeting people in our various locations around the world, visiting manufacturing facilities, getting out in the marketplace, doing retail tours all the time. So I was always out there with the front line because I wanted to hear the voice of the employees.
That's terrific. Indra, my old boss at the Coca-Cola company, Muhtar Kent, was a great admirer of yours. In fact, he sends along his best wishes, and I'm sure he'll be listening carefully to this podcast when it comes out. But you both you and Muhtar grew up outside the United States, but ended up leading these massive, iconic, if you will, American-born brands at the same time in history. Can you talk a little bit about how your international upbringing and perspectives informed your leadership and communication style?
Before I answer that question, Steve, I want to say something.
Okay.
The fact that I could, as a Indian-born woman coming here as an immigrant, grow and develop into leading one of the most iconic American companies, that sort of a journey can happen only in America.
Right.
So I think that we ought to all recognize that we live in an incredible country that gives people opportunities, still, even today. So we shouldn't sell ourselves short. So Absolutely. I want to start off with that. Now let me talk about Muhtar and me. I had the greatest respect and admiration and affection for Muhtar. We were running companies, we were fierce competitors, but we had great respect and affection for each other. So please give him my best.
You bet.
I can't speak to Muhtar's upbringing, but from my perspective, I grew up in a water-distressed city. And I know what the value of water is. So when, I'm imagining the Pepsi plant outside Madras, taking 2.5 liters of water out of the aquifers to make a liter of Pepsi, when the city has no water to drink or bathe or people are struggling, doesn't work. So I think a lot of your lived experiences, observed experiences, what you read, and the kinds of stuff that I read is everything to do with the issues of society. How can companies play a positive role in society? I went to Yale School of Management, which emphasized the interaction of business and society, and that businesses are successful only when societies are successful. So I would always study the issues of society. And in any country I went to, I landed the plane in Thailand, I became Thai. I landed in Saudi Arabia, I became Saudi. I landed in Turkey, I became Turkish. I wanted to understand the issues of that country. When you approach business with that viewpoint, with that mindset, you then start to get more conscious about your own business practices, which might have originated in the West, in a developed world, but have to be retooled for the developing and emerging markets. But then you bring that back and you realize that many of these developing emerging market problems also apply to parts of the developed world.
During your tenure as CEO, PepsiCo was widely praised for its high levels of employee engagement, and you were even famous for doing such things as writing personal notes to your employees' parents. We don't write notes anymore, I'm afraid, but that's such a good exercise to do. What are some employee engagement lessons that you could share with us today for today's leader?
In today's world of doing everything by Zoom, emails, texting, WhatsApp, whatever else, what we forget is we are dealing with human beings. We're still dealing with people with a heart, with an emotion, with a brain, and we've got to find a way to engage with people very, very differently. Whether it's writing actual notes so people can keep it as a record as opposed to an email, whether it's making an effort to meet families when you go into various cities and getting to know the families of your senior executives. Or in my case, I saw how people complimented my mother when I became CEO, saying, "You must have brought your daughter up right, that's why she's CEO." I thought I'd pay it forward by thanking the parents of my senior executives for giving me the gift of their child to PepsiCo, which seemed like a logical thing to do. I didn't do it to get emotional responses. I did it because I felt they were owed a note of thanks from me, because I had an awesome team and they were a product of their own upbringing. So I wrote a lovely letter to the parents. The reaction that I got from parents and from the employees blew me away. It was beyond anybody's wildest imagination how the emotions poured out. And so I think that people were just craving for that human touch, that human acknowledgement, that emotional connection which says, "I work so hard for this company. Do you realize the sacrifices I make?" And I go, "Yes, I do. That's why I thank your spouse, I thank your parents, and I'm genuinely grateful to your parents for bringing you up so well, and for your spouse for allowing you to spend as much time as you do at PepsiCo and making me feel good in the bargain." So I meant the thanks in a genuine way, not in a, "I got to write a letter today" way. Each letter was carefully thought through and very personally written.
One of my favorite passages is you say in your book that we walk into a home of one of your senior leaders, and on the wall was the framed letter that you had written to his parents. And that was one of the few things in their home. It really touched me.
I mean, that's what the employee wrote to me and said his single mother, who had brought him up since he was 8, when she moved to a retirement community, she lived in a very sparsely furnished room, but the only thing on the walls was this letter that she had framed and hung up.
I love that. Indra, one of my passions in teaching is to have an open classroom environment where my students can have civil discourse and can talk up and down and back and forth. And I really much encourage that with them. And I tell them, when you're sitting around a board table and you're working on some very thorny business issues, we have to have people who can push back and who can take a different side and talk from a different point of view. I'm concerned today that we're losing that. It's something that I maintain in my classroom, and so does Steve. Could you talk to us a bit about being in that boardroom and really wanting to have that kind of discussion and discourse that gets to all sides of a problem before you as a CEO have to make a hard decision?
So let me talk about two sides. One is my direct reports and the board of directors. There are two different things. In my direct report group, I did something which many CEOs hesitate to do. I hired people and promoted people who could actively push back. For example, I took Cynthia Trudell, who was on the board of directors, and I said, Cynthia, would you come and be my head of HR? Because I wanted an operating executive who would challenge me and push the talent equation much further than I might have otherwise. And I wanted somebody who wouldn't hesitate to walk into my office and say, you know what, you're full of shit, you've got to do something different. And Cynthia played that role brilliantly. All of the executives around me, every time we had our division presidents meetings, every other week, they never hesitated to speak out. And I never once said, stop it, this is my point of view and this is what we shall implement. I always listened to them. I would say 50% of the time, my point of view might have prevailed, but the other 50% of the time, their points of view prevailed. I'd say more than 50% of the time. And that gave people confidence that they could speak out, speak up, and their points of view mattered. Otherwise, nobody will speak up. So that was a dynamic that went on with my direct reports. Let me now talk about my board of directors. Very often people stack their board. They put people on the board that are yes people, maybe family and friends. I use family loosely, people you know well from the business world. In our case, we shaped the board. We said, these are the capabilities we need in the board to help us navigate this company for the decade ahead. So let's make sure we put the right capability on the board. Once you put that capability on the board, you've got to accept that this board is going to be outspoken, it's going to challenge you, and boy, they did it. Our board asked so many questions before meetings, during meetings, after meetings, and my big message to my senior team was, having such an involved and engaged board is the best thing that's happened to us. It's worth the time that we spend answering their questions. Because when we need them, they will always be there for us because they really understand the company.
Indra, you've shared some fantastic insights with us today about the importance of employee engagement and employee communication. You've just talked about the role of effective board communication and of course, leadership communication among your senior leadership team. There's another element that June and I are very interested. We've introduced it into our courses over the last couple of years, and that is investor relations and communicating to the investment community, a critical stakeholder. You obviously were very effective at that because not only did you create a tremendous amount of social value for PepsiCo, but you also generated a lot of shareholder value as well. And I know part of that is managing those relationships with the investor community and regularly communicating to them. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because about that process of IR communication, because it's something our students are really, really interested in.
I think investor relations, talking to investors, requires the CEO and the CFO, whoever goes to see investors, to have a very clear idea of your business, the value drivers of your business, the competitive forces that could derail those value drivers, and what is it you have that allows you to navigate this difficult environment and still deliver whatever you promised. So you can't go to your investors and make up things as you go along. Up front, you've got to have a crystal clear idea of what this company and the pieces are, how they all come together and create value. Because investors do nothing but focus on these issues all the time. So they ask you difficult questions. It's okay to say, I'll get back to you on the answer to that question, but let me now tell you what exactly you need to think about when you think about PepsiCo. So I think with my CFO, first Richard Goodman and then Hugh Johnston, we had people who really understood the company and the rubric of the company, how it comes together. We knew how it came together. We know all the pieces and how to, titrate the pieces. And so I think that when we communicated to investors, it was direct, it was clear, and it showed mastery of the subject. I'm not sure they liked it always because sometimes they'd wish we'd say something different, but we can't make up things. We can only tell them the truth about the company. And that's what we did every time. We told them the truth about the company. What was interesting is sometimes people would ask me, if you were the owner of this company, would you do anything different? The answer is no. I felt I was the owner of the company. When an activist was in our stock, the activist investor would say, I want you to do what I am suggesting, my plan for your company. And I'd look at the activist and say very respectfully, I am the internal activist. If I thought your plan would generate shareholder value and make long-term shareholder value, create long-term shareholder value, I'd follow it. But I think your plan is short-term, it's going to create a crisis for the company. I will not listen to you because I felt like an owner, I communicated like an owner, and I think all our senior executives did that. And to me, that's very, very important. An owner talks about their company very differently than being viewed as a hired hand.
Indra, I tend to shy away from discussions around women's leadership issues. I hope we are beyond that. As one of the most prominent women Fortune 50 leaders of all time, would you share your leadership insights with the women MBAs in our audience today?
So I start off by saying women are 70% of the high school valedictorians are girls. First point. Women are getting college degrees 10 points more than the men are. Women are now 50% or more of professional schools. Even in engineering schools like MIT, they are 47% of the class, 35% in Georgia Tech and Caltech. So we've got these women who are doing exceedingly well, getting all the top grades, graduating in large numbers, sticking with college and graduate school and slogging it out. And then this extraordinary talent goes out into the workplace and boom, unconscious bias, pay inequity. And if they want to start a family, no childcare, hardly any paid leave. So what are we telling the women? We don't care if you're wicked smart. We don't care if you want economic freedom, but we're not going to give you the tailwinds required to have a job, to engage in paid work. I just don't think that's right. I think we want women to have families. We want the citizenry of the country to grow. We want them to contribute to paid work. And we want them not to get completely overwhelmed by all the competing pressures on them. So I think that the time has come for us to stop talking about these things and say, hey, how are we going to attract the best and brightest to come to our company, irrespective of gender or ethnicity or background? Forget all that. If it was going to be absolutely blind and we were going to hire the best and the brightest, who would be the people that join our company?
So parting question, last question here, Indra, again from our students. What, if there was one golden nugget piece of advice you could give to our MBAs who are getting ready to reignite their careers, what would it be at this moment in time?
Well, just say, we're in a world which is uncertain. There's problems everywhere. Climate change is looming over us, even though some people would like to deny it. The world is flat, has been put on its head, and now people are questioning whether the world is going to retreat into nation borders. And the role of the multinational is going to be questioned. All of these things are happening around us. But one thing is common. We all, as MBA students, have to realize that corporations can play a positive role in society if they acknowledge that they can succeed only if societies succeed. I think that companies have got to dig deep and say, is what I'm doing good for society or not? And how can I improve my contributions, not just by doing corporate social responsibility programs, but fundamentally changing my business model so that I can leave a positive footprint on society. Just know that the problems of society cannot be fixed by society alone. It requires a partnership of nonprofits, companies, and governments to come together to address all the problems of society. And somehow I think our agendas are not in concert with each other. And we need to. We need to bring them together and figure out how together we can bring engines of efficiency and effectiveness together to solve these problems. So MBA students have to leave MBA schools, not by saying, how much money can I make in the shortest possible time? And I don't care what kind of carcasses I leave when I'm making money. Rather think about, how can I make money in companies where there's a real, genuine care for our impact on society, i.e. purpose. How do I go to a company, any company, that has in its DNA the notion of performance with purpose?
CEO Voices examines the communication that enables transformational leadership. June West is Associate Professor of Business Administration and co-founder of the Darden Leadership Communication Council, along with her colleague, Steve Soltis. Soltis is the former head of executive communication at the Coca-Cola Company and lectures at Darden. This podcast is a production of the University of Virginia Darden School of Business.